Redditors who grew up under communist rule, what was it like? How was your perception of the West? I was 5 years old when communism fell. My perception of the West pretty much non-existent at that time. I remember being fascinated by juice bottles made of glass as something extraordinary. I had seen one, empty, that my aunt had brought with her, and in Neckermann, a German catalog that was selling so many things, from clothes to stuff for the house, kitchen, etc., was fascinated with the pictures. Given the fact that the picture of the great leader Ceausescu was up on every public building wall, in my child's brain he was God. Lines for gas, bread, chicken. My grandma hiding to make a homemade kind of strong alcohol. I guess it wasn't allowed or something. Building a wood-burning stove in a tiny third-floor apartment to keep warm during winter and to keep the mold off the walls, as my sister has, asthma. Cold water 2 day morning and evening, hot rarely. Not talking about things, as in my mom telling me to never contradict her if I hear her telling a lie in public. Fun times. I was 9 in 1989 and had the luck to be born in Hungary. Honestly, by that time we lived more or less like any Western country. Yeah, you had to join the pioneer movement, Boy Scouts with blue and later red scarves. Russian language was mandatory. Everyone from my parents' generation learned Russian for 10 years, yet no one speaks a word. But I grew up watching G.I. Joe and Transformers cartoons on TV, so I got a pretty good picture of the Western world. I learned English from age 4, so always had some taste of the Western world. However, keep in mind that we had the softest dictatorship of them all. If you were not writing samizdat, not participating in anti-communist parties, not speaking against the regime publicly, you were pretty much left alone. The main difference was pretty much invisible from the outside. For instance, my father had a friend at high school who got fed up once at the Communist Youth Association meeting and got in a rude argument with the leader. He never got any formal punishments, but was never accepted to any universities ever. One of my friend's father went to a public celebration in a shirt with a large English flag. A policeman stopped him, and next Monday he was informed that he is expelled from his high school. But if you went to the communist gatherings, took part in the few mandatory celebrations, you were left alone. Oh, and the elections. Well, contrary to popular belief, all dictatorships hold elections to demonstrate their public support. We had elections which were fair, you could vote in secret, ballots were counted, etc. With one tiny exception, there was only one candidate. So you could go and vote on the candidate of the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party. Not showing up for voting was a serious thing, so we had over 80% participation and 98.5% of the votes were cast on the candidate of the party. Later it was decided that this is a bit rotten, so at every election, there had to be at least 2 candidates. So you could go and vote freely on either the candidate of the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party or the Patriotic People's Front. And you guessed it right, it did not make any difference. I was a teenager when the USSR fell. Looking back, I did have a pretty happy childhood, if somewhat lacking in consumer goods by modern standards. We could also get some stuff not available locally, like more fashionable clothes, unusual toys, or other trinkets during trips to Ukraine. It was common to have more variety in the stores in big cities of the republics, i.e., outside of what is now Russia. Food also had less variety than I can get now, but if you can't compare with anything else, you don't feel it lacking. And speaking of trips to Ukraine, OMG. Whole buckets of apricots or cherries could be had from local babushkas for mere pennies. Pale northern me was impressed. Growing up in a small town with zero crime rate was also pretty awesome in terms of how far I could travel alone. I also got my awesome free university education, technically in the non-Soviet Russia, but it stayed free and awesome for some time afterwards. Downsides. I've started feeling those when I was somewhat older. For example, I had these fancy jeans that my parents got for me somehow. But that was very clear that I got them only by chance. Some rich family refused them or whatever. And also as I grew I realized that once I outgrow my current size, there's a very real chance I'll never have such awesome pants ever again. And as the collapse started, the situation with basic goods, like food, started to become shittier and shittier. That's when I first saw hours-long queues to buy some bread and stuff. Perception of the West. When I was around 5, I saw a political cartoon in a newspaper, how evil Uncle Sam is going to nuke us all It wasn't very subtle, lol. I asked my grandma what did the cartoon mean, and she said, well, the capitalists want to bomb us. Which scared me shitless. I cried and asked her when it's going to be, today or tomorrow. To which she replied that, relax, it's just what they say, winky face. Still, I was pretty scared of being bombed for quite a while. Then as the Iron Curtain started to lift up, we got some movies and stuff pouring in, and from that point on the prevailing opinion was that the West is a magical fairy land, where everyone gets to have anything they want. 50 types of bologna in every supermarket. For whatever reason, that was considered to be a sure proof of how luxurious things are in the West. To me personally, the West did end up being pretty comfortable, thanks free education and the tech boom, but to many people it isn't so. I'm fairly confident that if the party leaders weren't so hell-bent on keeping people inside, the first few thousand of new emigrants would tell a less rosy picture about the West, after working minimum wage in NYC. And then the USSR could have stuck around longer, but it would have to be a saner, freer country in the first place, so I guess it wasn't meant to happen. I spent a few years in the USSR since my father was a scientist in a joint project. There was a village that we lived in, I think because it was close to a military research thing, and everyone had really simple possessions, but everything was super high quality. My parents still have clothes from that time, and my dad has some scientific equipment that looks like new. The thing was that everyone had a job and a stable life. My parents couldn't stop talking about it, what with us being from a third world country. According to the friends my parents were still in touch with, the dismantling of the USSR made things worse in that village. Made it better for some, I imagine. I grew up in Soviet Ukraine, and had a much more pleasant time with it because I was a kid. Doctors visited at home, free daycare, cheap basic food on the streets, safe streets, police doing their jobs on the roads, everything was perfectly cleaned at all times, playgrounds everywhere, fantastic transport, that I could safely get on at the age of 12 and go wherever I wanted, free summer camps, long vacations, giant military parades with balloons and marching in tanks, emphasis on art, science, education, health. Kids were brainwashed from the earliest age by books, stories, poems, activities, assemblies, TV, music, all about everyone doing their part and belonging to an organization that will serve the public. I loved how important of a job recycling was for kids. My parents kept me pretty sheltered from every struggle, but it was really obvious that there were products not readily available to us: furniture, good clothing and toys, Ukrainian literature. Even at a young age, it was obvious that no matter how nice it is to have the basics, the lack of actual quality of choices and freedom made none of it worth it. Ukrainian grandparents constantly talked shit about how much the Soviets took away from them, and all Ukrainian ethnics were politically involved in pushing for independence until it finally happened. Now Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the developed world, and part of it is because during the Soviet Union, it was settled by Russian families who are now very bitter about everything they've lost since Ukraine has gained independence. And another part of it is that few Ukrainians want to do their part because they can't spare the taxes to an infrastructure that is too broken to benefit them. It's a vicious cycle. To Ukrainians, freedom was worth it until the first opportunity to leave. My family left and will never go back. Every time there is a speck of hope to see progress in that country, shit just gets worse. As a Vietnamese born and raised in Hanoi, aka North Vietnam, I would like to share some of my views, not like someone who only has parents that live there, or escaped left for a better country to tell a tale, but as a common citizen who lives and witnesses their country. The idea is that you have a supreme leader who is like a saint and to rally and leading the people to a better future, and Ho Chi Minh was that man. From generation to generation, we have been told to only follow and support the Communist Party, the only party that is allowed to run, that leads us to prosperity. And somehow it becomes the truth. To truly understand why our people accept these dictatorial, you need to understand our 2,000 years of history. From ancient times, we were already under the control of China, and that control lasted for 1,000 years before we finally gained true freedom and became a country. And after 1,000 years of freedom, we faced a dependent fate from the West. Then France took over Indochina, set up a colony, starved to death over 2 million people. So sooner or later, someone will rise up and take back our freedoms at any cost. That is the time Ho Chi Minh become our leader. But we can't fight back a superpower stronger than us in everything, so we seek help. And in that time, to fight back against capitalism, France, we only have one option: communist. You see, we really don't care if it is communist or capitalism, all we want is peace and happiness. In hard times come hard methods. No doubt that our party did many wrong things, but we need something that people can hold on to. We fought 2 wars, even won it and gained peace. We still had to be content with another superpower. I was lucky to be born when the Soviet Union collapsed and our country began the Great Reform. Before that we lived in hard times, but everyone had a roof over their heads, food enough to be content. We had no luxury or much to spend, but it was a happy time for us. The party controlled everything, but we were lucky that the people who held the power were not too corrupt and very open-minded. As a child, I remember how short everything was, but I also learned how to be grateful for what I had. We did not have many TV programs to watch. That means children would come out to play more often, and by God, I missed that time. Food was not that scarce. Every child can become too fat, and most parents can afford for their children's food. We were short on luxury items, or to be exact, we can't buy these items because it is quite expensive. The government controls all information, OFC, and we know little about the West. Their motto about that is, common people should not know about bad things news because knowing that does nothing for them. For EXP, if a plane crashes, what can common people do with that information? Of course in time, to prove that it's pure bullshit, but like I said, Communist Party did many wrong things. But they also do many right things. I still remember the importance of study in my country, how government ensures that every citizen can speak, read and write, how everybody is equal. Like I said in another reply about our view, we are not North Korea. That war ended 40 years ago, and we moved on. Even with all the propaganda BS, I still think we are the most open-minded people. Everyone is welcome here, and we are curious about the world. We left Russia when I was 8. My family managed to sneak out in 2 groups and emigrate to America. What was it like is such a broad question. It was stricter. You didn't mess around as much, because your parents made sure you knew that they could get in serious trouble if you angered the wrong person. It wasn't like constant fear or anything, it wasn't Stalinism, but it was just less carefree. I grew up with conflicting ideas of the West. We knew the West had it better. Better food, better entertainment, better stuff in general. The government tried to hide it, but we knew. On the other hand, we were constantly indoctrinated with how unethical the West was. How they got what they got by hurting others. I remember when taking an English class, how one of the discussion questions was, why do you think capitalist countries have dangerous acts in circuses, where people often get hurt? The correct answers were because of money. These bad people paid money to watch other people risk themselves. They almost made it feel like the West had some sort of pseudo-slavery system going on. However, my parents were clearly not sold on all that. My dad's grandparents were all murdered in the revolution, and he didn't know the details. We to this day don't know even their names beyond their first names, and those thanks to some recovered letters. His parents both had false family and patronymics, but knew enough to distrust the official stories, and taught us to. Was hard not to buy into some of it though. I can say what struck me most when we first got to America was how clean everything was. Yeah, we don't often think of LA as clean, but compared to Vladivostok it is. The second thing that struck me was how much stuff was in stores. Just loads of it. Not just quantity, but variety. It amazed me. It felt like entering fairy tale land. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.